In episode 4, the repairs that were made simply aren't good enough. The ship is going to need to stop off and get a proper repair job, and they decide to do that at Navarro, where they're reunited with Cara Dune and Greef Karga. And both Cara and Greef are thrilled to see Mando, and especially the child. It's kind of the star attraction. Greef instructs his repairman to give the Razor Crest a total repair job and make it good as new. But as they're walking away from the ship, one of the repairmen is eyeing up Mando and the child. Although Mando doesn't see this, he continues to walk into town with Greef and Cara. And they're filling Mando into all the things they've been doing. Cleaning up the town, with Cara as the marshal, and Greef as kind of the impromptu mayor. And they've done a really good job of cleaning up the town. Showing him one example of that bar that they were trapped in by Moff Gideon and his men, the bar that was shot to bits, has been turned into a school. And it's at that school where Greef Karga decides to leave the child for safekeeping. The Mandalorian isn't thrilled about this, saying where he goes, I go, but Greef tells him where we're going is no place for a child. And Cara reassures him that the child will be in safekeeping at the school. There's a droid teacher and a bunch of kids around. Nothing's going to happen to him. So Mando, Greef, and Cara all head to Greef's office, where, to the Mando surprise, Mythrol, the first guy we ever saw the Mandalorian taken in custody, is sitting at the desk working for Greef Karga. And he is terrified to see the Mandalorian. Greef is taking him in a trade-off where he can work off his debt. And that debt is large. It's 350 years. They then go off and talk business. They bring up a map of Navarro, and Navarro is pretty much cleaned out by them. I mean, it's very safe, except for this one area with an old Imperial base. This is the same base where all the troops came from when Moff Gideon attacked them and they ended up defeating them. Now, they don't know why, but it hasn't been abandoned yet. What they do know is that there's a lot of weaponry in there. And that kind of weaponry would be big money on the black market. But Greef Karga just wants them gone. Because if they clear out that base, Navarro could be a trade anchor for the entire sector. So, with time to kill, because his ship is getting repaired, the Mandalorian, Cara, Mythrol, and Greef Karga all head off to the base. And when they get there, they're unable to get in because the wiring for the door is all messed up. Greef tasks Mythrol with trying to get in there, but he's having trouble. So the Mandalorian, using his jetpack, flies up to the top of the base, and as Mythrol is arguing with Cara, all of a sudden, a dead stormtrooper flies down and hits the ground, and the doors magically open up. The group then gets in the elevator, takes it up, and they see the Mandalorian standing there with 2 dead stormtroopers at his side. And the stormtroopers being there was kind of a surprise because this was supposed to be pretty empty. But Greef Karga doesn't think anything of it. He's more concerned about destroying the base. And luckily for him, he knows how to do that. The whole base is powered by a reactor, so if they sneak in and overload the reactor, the base is going to explode. So all they have to do is get into the heat shaft and drain the cooling lines, and then boom. So they head into the base and they head to the command center where they find yet another soldier. They kill him, black out all the cameras, and grab a key. But at this point, they know they need to be careful because obviously this base is still somewhat active. So they carefully make their way down to the reactor core where it's a steep drop into very hot lava. And there's not a lot of room for error. I mean, if you slip, you're dead. So Greef Karga doesn't want that. And he doesn't want to risk Cara or Mando, so he tasks Mythrol with heading over to controls and drain the cooling lines. And Mythrol is able to do it, and it's only a matter of time before this base is up in flames. And they need to get the hell out of there. They have about 10 minutes, but as they're leaving, they see 2 other Imperial guards at a control center. And there was something at this control center that one of the Imperial guards did not want them to see because he's trying to destroy it, but the group ends up killing them both. But when they turn around, they see a bunch of deformed figures and tanks, and they realize that this was not a military base, but yet a lab. And they know they need to figure out what's going on. And Mythrol, heading over to the control center, is able to find what they might have been trying to destroy. It's a message from Dr. Pershing, and he's explaining in this message that the test subject that they were working on rejected the blood that they had. He recommends that they suspend experimentation because he fears that the volunteer that they have is also going to die. He goes on to explain that he's exhausted all the blood that he had because the child was small, and he could only get a little bit without killing him. He finishes up the message saying that if they do continue with the experimentation, he's going to need access to the donor. And he promises not to disappoint Moff Gideon again. Initially, the Mandalorian thinks this must be an old message, but it's not. It's only 3 days old, which means Moff Gideon is not dead, as they previously thought. And because of that, the Mandalorian knows he needs to get back to the child immediately, because if Moff Gideon's out there, the child is in danger. So the Mandalorian leaves Cara, Greef, and Mythrol, heading back into town to get the child and his ship. And he flies out of the base while stormtroopers are shooting him. Greef, Cara, and Mythrol are also trying to get out of the base, but they get trapped. And as the stormtroopers are shooting them, Cara is able to get them out of there by hopping in a marauder that was on the deck. And the group also heads back to town, but they have stormtroopers on their ass on speeder bikes. So Greef Karga hops in the back and mans the gun, picking off the stormtroopers one by one. And as the last stormtrooper falls, in the background, you can see the base explode. And the group thinks that they're home free, but they're not. Because right before the base exploded, 4 TIE fighters were able to take off. And they are hot on the group's tail. Greef is able to destroy one of them, but the TIE fighters are catching up quickly. And it seems like it's only a matter of time before one of these TIE fighters is able to hit the group. But luckily for the group, the Mandalorian did make it back to town, grabbing the child, grabbing his ship, and saving the group, taking on the TIE fighters by himself. Greef, Cara, and Mithril are able to make it back into town, and they hop out of the ship in just enough time to watch the Mandalorian pick off the TIE fighters one by one in the sky. And Greef radios to the Mandalorian, "How can I ever repay you?" But the Mandalorian says, "Don't worry about it, you repaired my ship, we're even." He also rejects Greef's offer to buy him a drink because he's got a Jedi to find. Now, with all this commotion that went on, the 2 X-Wing fighters that were patrolling the sky that tried to pull the Mandalorian over head to Navarro to investigate, but Greef isn't really willing to give them any information. The X-Wing fighter even asks him how long before the Razor Crest showed up, but Greef doesn't even admit to seeing that. As the X-Wing fighter is leaving, he sees Cara, and he tries to recruit her into the Rebel Alliance, and they could really use her because he's well aware of her abilities. But she says, I'm not really into that. He says there's something going on out there. They don't believe it on the core worlds, but it's true. Something's up. These aren't isolated incidences. They need to be stopped before it's too late. But we can't do that without local support. He's not getting a response from Cara, so he tries to make a personal connection with her, telling her that he had fought in battle on her home planet. And he asks her, "Did you lose anybody?" And she says, "Yeah, I lost everybody." He then apologizes for her loss and puts down an Imperial badge, and then he leaves. But on an Imperial ship, they get a message from one of the mechanics, because the mechanic was an Imperial spy, the same one that was eyeing up the Mandalorian and the child, and he's placed a tracking chip on the Razor Crest. So he lets one of the Imperial guards know about this, and she heads to alert Moff Gideon. Moff Gideon asks if the Mandalorian still has the child, and she says yes, our source confirmed it. To which he responds with, "We will be ready." And he isn't kidding. They are loading up with Shadow Stormtroopers. Thank you so much for watching this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you don't see the next video up in the corner, don't worry, I'll get it up in a couple days. Hit thumbs up if you liked the video, hit thumbs down if you didn't, and be nice in the comments section.